Hey there, art nerds. So if you're anything like me, you have gotten a lot of ads on Instagram from this store called Case for Making. They're a small art supply store in San Francisco, and although I have been to San Francisco numerous times, I've never been to Case for Making. Maybe they came about after my friend who lived there moved away, but I get a lot of their watercolor supply ads. And they just look so cute and they look so aesthetic, and they're handmade by the employees of the store, and they have all of these colors and they look like they swatch beautifully. So I couldn't help myself. I got one of their sets when it went on sale last year. So 2024, this is 2025. It hasn't been sitting around a whole year, I promise. So today we are going to talk about Case for Making watercolors. Are they worth the price? Are they a premium handmade watercolor like Stoneground or Beam watercolors? Or are they something else? Let's find out together. I just wanted to give you guys a little taste of how I came across Case for Making. I found it on Instagram. It gets recommended to me a lot, and it just looked like such a cute, cozy little shop that these watercolors have been on my mind for a long time. So when they kind of restocked and had a sale, I decided it was time to take advantage of it. So here's a quick look at the metal palettes that they had available at the time of purchase. I realize I'm going through this really quickly. It's a lot to look at, but you know, watching somebody else shop is not always the most interesting either. So I opted to adjust an existing palette to suit my needs based on the color swatches that they provided. I will say, a little bit of a spoiler, compared to what I found when swatching these watercolors, the swatches weren't exactly true, and I end up with some colors that I really kind of regret. But we're going to talk about that more a little bit later on in the video. So you guys can see the palette itself, pretty expensive. The paints themselves range from $9.50 to $12 each, so on the more expensive end. Hey guys, so today I have another one from my backlog. Today we have something that's been kicking around my studio that I ordered from Case for Making a while back, and I figured I would share it with you guys. Inside, we have a very nice little note that I will get back to in a moment. We have some green tissue paper that Basil might enjoy. And then we have a small brown paper bag that Basil might also enjoy. Let me remove that gold tape. And inside is this tiny, very pretty little black palette. It's fairly heavy. It has a ring on the back, and it looks like it has been enameled. If you're not familiar with Case for Making, we will talk about them in a little bit, but I want to talk about what's in front of us for right now. So let me read their card for you guys. Hi, Becca. We love the palette you built. We hope you love painting with it. Sending our best, CFM, Case for Making. And then here is their addresses. And then over here is an explanation. Case for Making is a creative supply store in San Francisco. Our love for high quality materials and the creative process led us to produce our own line of handmade watercolors and watercolor paper goods. We also teach select workshops so we can share our knowledge with the community. Our watercolors are made from the highest quality pigments available and are molded by hand in our shop using natural watercolor medium made from gum arabic, honey, and a touch of glycerin. The result is a highly pigmented, rich watercolor that dries with a lovely matte finish. We make over 90 colors, and each pigment has its own unique characteristics. We hope you enjoy experimenting with them. Happy painting. And of course, I found out about this probably via Instagram, and I figured, you know, this is something we should check out together. So this is the tiny little palette. Look how pretty. Look how cute. So this is a somewhat custom palette that I put together. It was a base palette and I subbed out a few of the colors in the base palette with colors that would be maybe more useful or more fun for me. I really like that they provided that option. I think you can also make palettes totally from scratch. You get a choice in the color of the exterior of the palette as well. I opted for black because honestly it was the cheapest. And I have a feeling I purchased this while they were having a sale. On the top is this beautiful, I don't know if you can see it, little embossed swatch sheet. And I'm actually looking for people who manufacture these because there's something really satisfying about that. So it'll be kind of fun to play around with that today. And this is a heavy little case. And then we have our colors here. It looks like the swatches were hand done. And I'm definitely getting the smell of clove, which is really nice. So yesterday I swatched some Stoneground watercolors. It was the Mint Gardener set. So that had a lot of opaque colors, that had a lot of pinks in it. I'm going to be kind of comparing the Case for Making set against the quality of the Stoneground set, at least in my mind, and talking about it just a little bit. In general, I don't like comparing one hand maker directly against another. I don't think that's fair. However, Stoneground is a small business. They're not just, one person grinding watercolors. They are an operation. And Case for Making is a shop with a similar setup. So I think it's a little more fair to compare them, but it isn't meant to be like buy one and not the other. It's just simply because it's natural to compare two very similar things and use that as a standard to talk about for people who have tried one but maybe not the other, or are interested in trying one and cannot afford both, that sort of thing. We have moved on over to the desktop. Here is the Case for Making site. And you can see they have their handmade watercolors lined up here at the top. And individually, they range from around $8 to around $12. They look like they are fairly opaque colors, if you guys can kind of see. And I'm also seeing what could be a little bit of scaling. I'm not sure. I'll have to swatch them myself. And then they recently introduced these really cute magnetic mini palettes. This was after I had purchased my palette. I've been sitting on it for a little while. It just took me a while to get to it, what with, wrapping up Lilliputian Living. These are much more affordable. So if you want to try Case for Making watercolors, this might be the way to do it rather than investing in, half pans. I'm trying to find something comparable to the base palette that I have here. I think it's something similar to this. And I believe I have footage from when I was purchasing this, so I can kind of show you guys the process. It is cool though that they are selling pigment tinted handmade paper sheets. If you are familiar with Strathmore Neptune, the tinted watercolor paper that's been long discontinued, you know that I am on the search for an accessible, maybe even cotton rag tinted watercolor sheet. So they have quite a few things. We're not gonna dig into all of that, but I did want to look at the workshops. I followed them on Instagram, and like once a month or so they send out a little graphic that explains what workshops are coming out. I think that's really neat. And what they have coming up is Moods of the Sky and Watercolor Flora, and that looks absolutely gorgeous, and it looks like they might be using Gensai style or more opaque watercolors. See, now I found, here's the different palettes, but while I was looking at that, I actually found the palette builder, which I think is what I did. Now, I thought they were more of an art supply store, and that might be the case. I'm in a little bit of a rush today. I've got basil running all over me and Bowie nagging for food, but I think this is what I was using to put together a palette. And then you can also start with like a pre-made set and then sub out colors, which I think is a lot easier for folks who like a good basic mixing set, don't want to have to locate all those colors on a website, and just want to sub out a few favorites. And maybe it's mostly watercolor with just like a few other things. Not going to go through everything, obviously. You can do that on your own. You can shop on your own. But I did kind of wanted to show you guys where I got these from, what the thought process was behind them. They've been popping up on my Instagram for a while, and I've been kind of watching them until they went on sale and I could, kind of afford to splurge on them and talk about them with you guys. Today, I'm hoping to unwrap these, explore them with you guys, swatch them, do some color mixing, do some wet into wet testing, do some lift testing, and maybe even paint a field test with you guys. Of course, the field test is not all going to be done today, but for the purposes of YouTube magic, it will all be done today. So let's get started with unwrapping these watercolors. This is going to be a little easier than a lot of my watercolor reviews have been lately, because those have been tube watercolors and I have to open those and then decant those, and so this is going to be a lot easier for me. So this is a small enamel palette. These are like really in there to the point where I am not super sure how I'm going to get them out. I am not familiar with this kind of palette. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with this. I don't know how I'm going to get these colors out. So that'll be a fun little challenge because they are in there. Let's take a moment though and admire the packaging. They are really pretty. They're very cute. There's metallic accents. They seem like they've been hand wrapped with a heavier watercolor paper. Some of the wrappers have gold and some have like gray or black. It's probably just, a difference in time in when these were made. I do have a teeny tiny screwdriver, and I'm gonna, if I can get the first one out, I think I might have enough room to get other ones out, but this top row is really, really tightly packed. Like how, I'm sure I'm missing a trick here. I'm sure there is some way to get these out and I just don't know. But I don't know how to get these out. I really do not. They are in there. I may have to ask Joseph to help me out. With much struggling, Joseph was able to get one of these kind of out. Look, I have to be real with you guys. It's very cute, but if something is packaged in such a way that the customer can't access it, it's worthless. Like, maybe they should have not put them in the tin. Like, they could have wrapped them and then sent them separately, and I could have organized them because I'm going to have to take them out and unwrap them anyway. And, maybe you feel like I'm unnecessarily complaining, but they're very tight in there. And if you can't get them out, then you can't get them out. And all the twee in the world isn't going to get these watercolors out for me. I'm still fighting with it. I managed to get one out, and I really don't want to harp on this because I know some folks feel like I can skew kind of negative. So I have some hand disabilities from Sjogren's syndrome. I have some arthritis. I asked Joseph to help, and he tried really hard, and he's struggling with it, and he used to rock climb, and he's got really good hand strength. Why are these so hard to get? Why didn't you package them with thinner? You can see how thick the paper is. I'm gonna let that be the last that I say about it, but it shouldn't, I can't even get two out. I managed to pry one out. I tried from the top row because I was kind of thinking, I was kind of thinking if I can get, and I'm using like a metal palette knife. I was using a screwdriver, but it was too thick. Maybe I should try a different color. I don't know. But it's a very sturdy little palette that is really hard to get the watercolors out of. And I mean, you guys can see what I'm trying to do. So, case for making, please consider sending I'm sure once the half pans are in, it'll fit. It won't be a problem. But like, please consider packaging this differently. So after I got the middle row out, I think I figured something out. It's one of these kind of palettes. So they're friction fit in. If you can get the middle row out, I think you can, yep, get the whole thing out. However, that middle row was still really a challenge. There were no instructions. I've been painting since 2009, maybe a little before that, and there were no instructions on this kind of a palette. This is my first time encountering such a palette, so I think it's kind of a non-obvious thing. And even just some instructions like, hey, start with the middle, because they included some paperwork about their shop and their watercolors and about like a little thank you note. They could have included some instructions on this particular type of palette. But hey, we got them out. I'm happy about that. It got easier as it went along. So let's move on to unwrapping these. So I need to write down the colors that I ordered. There is a small gold tape holding it closed. It doesn't seem like the top is just meant to rip off, which would be helpful because I'm going to have a heck of a time peeling this Mylar tape off. Very cute, but not very accessible. Even an easier washi would have been, you know, just a little bit easier for somebody like me. I can paint things that look like this and this and this, but I can't get the tape off of this. All right, so I'm going to have to write these down because they didn't include a list of the colors that I bought or an invoice or anything like that. And I'm going to need to write them down for my reference. Yeah, this is a little obnoxious to remove. I promise I don't want to just complain. I'm so sorry. It does leave a little bit of sticky, but I am going to point out like issues, especially accessibility issues, because a lot of artists are disabled and may just choose not to talk about it. And disability or disabled is kind of the only thing that, well, not the only thing. You can also become an artist at any point in your life, but disabled is also a thing you can become at any point in your life. So this is CFM Rose. I'm going to unwrap, actually, let's finish unwrapping this. It is written on the side, which I appreciate. And it is not actually as full as the Stoneground Paints that I talked about the other day. It doesn't have that nice little muffin top. It's kind of depressed under. It definitely does smell like clove. And this one is definitely going to be an opaque one. And I have a feeling that a lot of these are going to be more opaque than I'm used to with mass market watercolors. One thing I'm noticing right off the bat compared to Stoneground and compared to a few of the other professionally made watercolors that I've talked about here is these look really dry. They look a little dusty, y'all. And I know their ingredients include honey, gum arabic, and glycerin. All three of those are humectants. And they are all going to be like hydrophilic, which means they're going to want to pull in water from the atmosphere. And I live in Louisiana, so it's plenty of water to pull, although it is actually really beautiful outside today, and I think the humidity is actually, it's 36 in my house, so not too bad. Anyway, I'm just surprised at how dry these things, how dusty and how dry these things look. So the next thing we need to do is we need to get to swatching. So today we're going to be doing our testing on the Blick Premier Cotton Rag watercolor paper block. I've already drawn my opacity stripe at the top. We're going to be swatching the watercolors. We're going to then swatch them in the included lid thing that is super cute. We are going to be doing some color mixing, and then we're going to do a wet into wet test. And then I will decide whether or not to include a field test or not. Kind of depending on what we see from these, because I tried another brand of handmade, not saying these aren't, I'm saying those aren't, watercolors. I think it's like CSY watercolors. Maybe they're trying to look like case for making. And they were atrocious. But hopefully these are so much better than that. So the first thing I want to do is give these a spritz. There we go. Let them soak up that water. Give those pigments a chance to wake up and activate and be ready and available for us to use. And then we can get to swatching. With my initial swatches, the colors seemed fairly rich and saturated. They offer up immediate color, and it takes no real scrubbing. I'd like to know the pigment makeup of some of these CFM colors. I'm seeing a little scaling with the CFM Denim, which looks like a Prussian blue and is drying lighter than I expected, but we'll have to see how the masstone swatch dries. CFM Velvet looks like it granulates out with some black. CFM Cypress is a really nice one. These muddy the water quickly. I did some forced granulation swatches. Some colors granulate as expected, like the ultramarine blue is very pretty, and some granulate that I wasn't sure would, like Cypress, Denim, Plum, and Velvet. Now for some color mixing. We're going to do two types of color mixing. We're going to do optical and we're going to do atomic. For color mixing, we're going to start by laying down our grid for our optical mixes using some pretty common primaries. I ended up with fewer primaries than I really thought I would have in this set. So we only have one yellow, for example, and I ended up with just one blue, which is pretty unusual for me. So for atomic mixing, secondary color mixes for oranges and greens are weak. Maybe it's the yellow that I bought. It's a cooler yellow, but it's a bit on the white side. So instead of having good tinting strength, it just kind of turns to nothing. Adding a little of the yellow ochre helps to build up impact. Purples mix really nicely though, and that's not even using plum, which is already a purple mix. I'm not super sure why I chose this pink. While I love pinks, I generally don't like these kind of pinks. The swatch makes it look the digital swatch from the internet made it look a little bit better than what I ended up with. Their velvet swatch online is much richer than the velvet that I received. Finishing up the optical swatches, colors glaze really nicely without reactivating. I'm just going to go ahead and do the wet into wet down here on the remaining piece of paper. And I am saturating the area with a lot of clean water using a large flat brush because we're going to be adding paint into the water and just kind of seeing what it does. I did notice a lot of scaling, not granulation, but scaling with certain colors, particularly Citron Yellow. This color seems like a real problem child. So far, I think the idea is charming, but not worth the money. In person, you're probably paying for the experience, the shop, picking out your faves, the customer service, but online, you don't really see those things beyond the note, so it's hard to justify these. I'm not currently saying they're bad, just expensive. Okay, so this is the wet into wet test, and I wanted to actually show you what I'm talking about. So you can see there's scaling going on. I wouldn't call it granulation because you can actually see how it looks like little waves upon the shore, and there's like little white caps on those little waves, right? So that would be scaling. That can come from the inclusion of unnecessary optical brighteners. It definitely can make for muddy and unpredictable color mixes, and that inclusion could also explain why the mixes that use this yellow are so weak. Now, for comparison, if we're talking about granulation, this is granulation. The ultramarine blue is granulation. You can't really see it in this example, so we'll just slide on up here. Granulation, 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 granulation. So there's a difference between looking for and looking at granulation and looking at scaling. They included an embossed card for their swatches. I think this is a really charming idea. I wish they would sell blanks of these cards because it's just kind of fun to swatch in the embossment. I think a lot of people might enjoy this. Now, this does feel more like a hot press or a cotton, but not a watercolor cotton paper. And my preference does tend to be cold press, but this was still a lot of fun. Finished yet. I still want to do some kind of a field test with this. I just haven't decided what it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be my standard where I kind of re-ink a Lilliputian Living and paint that for you guys. It's probably going to be something more like a Stash Buster bookmark because some of the issues with these watercolors, like the scaling, I really don't think they're going to do a good job painting faces, particularly teensy little faces, and they may do better with something a little bit more abstract. So once I think of what I'm going to do with these, we can finish this up. I am pre-activating the watercolors, and I'm using a palette that I got from Etsy that I happen to really enjoy. I did a pour over watercolor technique with ultramarine blue, and I'm just soaking up the extra liquid so that it doesn't stay pooled on the paper and take forever to dry. The ultramarine blue does granulate, but I feel like it granulates kind of strangely. I've also noticed that when these dry out, they're much harder to activate and to get the color moving. I feel like there isn't enough humectant in these paints. It did take quite a bit of scrubbing. I'm also noticing that after a couple of thin layers, the line art gets obscured quickly. So I chose a subject matter that I thought suited the color palette that I had, that I thought would reflect the best properties of these watercolors. And I'm also choosing a method of handling that I thought would be very forgiving. I'm doing a lot of really soft wet into wet because I thought that would kind of play well with the mistiness of these watercolors and not require a lot of secondary color mixing. We're mostly color mixing wet into wet and also doing some optical watercolor. So usually when I do field test, I like to paint figurative things. I like to paint like tiny people, and I like to paint stories, that kind of thing, right? But I went with something that I felt would be a better reflection of these paints. I really wanted to give them a fair chance, and I know that I'm probably not their target demographic. They're not marketing towards comic artists, so I adjusted my subject matter to be something that was a little bit more fair to who I thought these paints were trying to appeal to. So I'm pointing that out because I really wanted to like this palette, and I really wanted to be fair about this palette since it is a small handmade product. So colors get dry, dusty, and desaturated. The orange on the little pansies was much more vibrant when it was wet, and then it dried very pastel and weak. It's challenging to mix a good purple, which is kind of contrary to what I saw with the secondary color mixes. And honestly, mixing a good purple with these colors should be no problem. I have a cool red, a warm blue, and 2 pre-mixed purples in this set, plus a red violet. This is actually part of the reason I chose to paint pansies. Can I say P this many times in a row without messing up? I impressed even myself. I've barely dipped a toe in, but given how desaturated and pale the colors are, I really cannot recommend these, and I feel like they're very overpriced. I noticed that colors that dry this dusty tend to have a lot of filler in them rather than pigment, so I'm assuming that these are not pigment plus binder plus antifungal agent plus humectant, but probably also the addition of optical brighteners or extenders, putting things more in the student grade range. I realize these are a handmade product offered by Case for Making, and I hope that if they do watch this review that they take this in good faith. I'm mentally comparing them to Stoneground and finding them to be lacking. Now, if you're not familiar with Stoneground Watercolor is another small business, small batch, fairly handmade watercolor. It's made up in Canada by a family. I'm also kind of comparing these to Beam Paints, similar conditions, and I think both of those are probably a better fit if you want to support a small business and get better watercolors than the Case for Making paints. Now, something that kind of sucks about reviewing art supplies is that I can do a solid line art that should result in a really cute illustration, put the time, effort, and knowledge in, and it still doesn't work because the paints were a miss. That said, I make these mistakes so you guys don't have to. I want you guys to be happy with what you paint, and I don't want your paints to be the reason you're unhappy with it. Now, I still love reviewing art supplies. I just hate ruining a good line art. However, I do have a scan of this, so I can always reprint, repencil, and re-ink, and I've definitely done that before. But you know, it is discouraging to put this amount of time into something just for it to be a flop. But as I mentioned earlier, it's just kind of a reminder of why I review art supplies, because I have enough experience with paints, so much experience with different brands of paints, that I realize when it's a flaw in the paint versus when it's my mistake. And I make plenty of mistakes. I'll cop to that. But somebody who's less experienced with paint might not realize that. So I'm hopefully saving you guys some pain and saving you guys from beating yourselves up over something that just isn't necessarily your fault, especially with something like this, which is so expensive. We tend to equate quality with price. So I'm going to probably keep harping on this, but these colors dry so dusty. It is so disappointing if you like saturated color. If you're looking for a better alternative, Maimeri Blu watercolors are great for florals. They have some color oomph, some opacity, but way better color. These are very when worked in layers, but they're just kind of bad when worked dry over dry or heavy wet over dry. Stodgy, not enough oxgall if you're like me and you love good color movement wet into wet. Colors that should be heavy split granulators just aren't, and that's so disappointing, especially someone like me who loves good granulation. I am seeing some scaling, which definitely points to the inclusion of extenders or optical brighteners. These are really disappointing because I get a lot of Case for Making ads, and I assume that many of y'all do too. The promise of these being handmade by the store watercolors got me. I thought these might be higher quality and comparable to other store brands, but these are just so disappointing. I tried spritzing the illustration, and we'll get to that. It's a little bit further in. I got ahead on my notes. I tried spritzing them in a little bit to get some movement, but it seems pretty stuck where it's at, and it makes me wonder what kind of binder they're using. I've had a lot of mediocre experiences with handmade watercolors, and I wonder if it's because the loose pigments that are available for small batch purchasing are inferior to those sold in bulk to large companies, or if it's a matter of how it's milled. This is just personal opinion based on what I like to paint and how I use watercolor. You may have a favorite handmade brand that shines. I did like Lycomorphos colors and felt like while they granulate cleanly and without scaling. The colors in this palette though are dull, muted, and if you use a line art with these watercolors, you're going to have to re-ink. Darker colors dry too light, lighter colors dry too light, and colors are stodgy and don't move when spritzed with water. While many of these colors are granulating and should granulate on Arch's cold press, which is what I'm using here, the granulation in general is not that noticeable. So I allowed this illustration to dry overnight. When I was just about finished, you guys can see I'm still painting. I am ahead of myself, I realize that. This is not meant to be one-to-one, I'm sorry. So after I allowed it to dry overnight, I re-inked it, and you have to be careful when re-inking because the ink catches on the pigment and it bleeds out. This happens with cheaper watercolors. I also noticed that the paints in the set get used up really fast. These also strangely have very little opacity, like trying to add a yellow vein to the pansy leaves later on just didn't work out the way that I had hoped. So what are the pros and cons of the case for making watercolors? I found that this is cute, but it is an expensive palette. They do now have a smaller version available that might be a little bit less expensive. It has a cute embossed swatch sheet. And when you buy from them, you're supporting a small business. You're supporting an art supply store in San Francisco. So now we have to talk about the cons. I think these are too expensive for the quality that you receive, and I am taking into consideration that these are handmade watercolors. These perform poorly. They're more like a student grade than a good handmade. They have weak color coverage and dry really desaturated, and they muddy the line art. I would recommend that you go with Maimeri or Stoneground over these paints, particularly if you like to paint florals. So what's my verdict? I think you should probably consider skipping these watercolors Or if someone from Case for Making is watching this, please strongly consider reformulating. There are other small batch, small business watercolors on the market that perform better. Beam and Stoneground are two examples that come readily to mind. While I was able to turn the illustration around, it's not nearly as good as I know it should be. I think Case for Making is doing some interesting things with embossing paper, so I'll check that out at another time. So unfortunately, as those of you who have hung out here on the channel for a while know, aesthetics will definitely sell me a product, but aesthetics are not enough to make up for a product that doesn't perform the way I want it to. And I just felt like the Case for Making watercolors are overpriced, they're kind of dusty, the colors do not handle the way I hoped that they would handle. They're just not really a good fit for me and the kind of watercolor art that I do. And the field test I did for these should have been a knock out of the park. It's a flower that I happen to really like. It is a flower that has a lot of the same colors that the palette has. And really, painting florals can be a chance for watercolors that I haven't liked in the past to really shine. And I just really was not happy with how the paints handled. I didn't really like how cloudy they were, how poorly they mixed, how they couldn't hold saturation, how the colors lost transparency and just bottomed out chroma wise as I was trying to achieve certain effects. They just are not a good fit for me and the kind of watercolor art that I do. So these are pricey watercolors and they are a handmade product that are made in small batches by individuals rather than a large operation like Core or M Grams where they're going to have like massive industrial equipment. However, I do think changing their humectant to something that's going to be more hydrophilic than, I'm not sure what their binder is. If it is just gum arabic, they might want to add more gum arabic to the mixture. They might want to add some honey. They might want to add some glycerin, just something to kind of help loosen up these watercolors and to make them not dry out so quickly, because you do have to keep scrubbing at them to get them to release their color. There's something in the mix that they've got going on that isn't really working, in my opinion. Now, to be fair to Case for Making, they actually have workshops and they have watercolor workshops, and they do have artists who teach these workshops, assumably with their paints. So this is just my opinion. It is one person's opinion, but generally, if you watch, and I know some of you guys are new here. Hi, hello, welcome. Sorry I didn't greet you sooner. It took the whole video to do it. I know some of you guys are new here, but like some of you guys watch a lot of my stuff. So I think where I'm going with this is, if you generally agree with what I have to say about watercolors, if you're looking for the same things in watercolor that I am typically looking for, this is not the set for you. This is almost as expensive as Stoneground watercolors. So if you're gonna spend this kind of money on a small business or a handmade product, and I see no reason for you not to, other than, you know, financial constraints. But if you have the budget and you want to support a handmade small batch product, I think Stoneground is better than Case for Making, in my opinion, for the kind of stuff that I do. If you guys are interested in seeing a head-to-head comparison, I would be happy to do that in a follow-up video. Just let me know down in the comments below. Not for me, and unfortunately I cannot recommend these to other people just based on how I like to paint and what I like to do with watercolor. So I hope today's review was helpful, useful, and informative. Hopefully it allowed you to make an informed decision from someone who is not biased. I do not know this store, I do not know this company, I do not know, to my knowledge, any of their employees. I went in with just hopes and dreams and vibes. I felt like it was, now they do have cheaper palettes now than when I bought this. This is kind of like a bijou palette. These tend to be more expensive. They're not actually my preference. Now they have a magnetic palette that's more like a makeup palette, and because it contains less paint, it's more economical. And if that had been available, I would have gone with that. But that would not change how I feel about these watercolors. It just would have meant I would have spent less money to find out that I don't like these watercolors. So hope this was helpful, useful, and informative for you guys. If you are looking for watercolor recs, because this is not for you, you can check out my professional grade watercolor playlist. If you're looking to support handmade and small business, I believe I have a playlist of those kind of businesses now, and I'm going to try to talk about that more here on the channel in the future to support fellow small businesses. If you like my art and you would like to support what I do, there's 3 ways that you can do it. You can interact with me on social media. I am on Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram. Blue Sky is my favorite. You can also interact with me here on YouTube. You hitting like, you leaving a comment, you resharing my art tells the algorithmic gods that be that, hey, Becca's making stuff that other people might want to see, and it helps those other people see my stuff. It also means so much to me. And so a few years ago, my husband made, it's like a screensaver for our TVs, and it's all of the art compliments that you guys have given me over the years. He's been collating them for years. So there's like a piece of art and the compliment, and that has gotten me through so many really bad, self-doubty, depressy days. So if you like my work, please actually say so. Let me know, because I don't actually hear it all that often, and it always means so much to me when you guys say that. So that is the for free way that you can support what I do. The other way, well, there's 3 ways, like we said. The other way is you can join me over on Patreon. This is the inexpensive way, and just $2 a month, you're supporting the creation of reviews and tutorials here on this channel. And I'm also working on zhuzhing up what goes out to my backers, my backer exclusive stuff. So I have been running polls, and I have been asking questions, and I've been trying to figure out what you guys specifically want to see as backers. So hopefully I will have more good stuff for you guys in 2025. You can find that at patreon.com/notasoup. I use the funds from Patreon to buy many of the art supplies that I review here on this channel. But not all, because a lot of that is purchased out of pocket with funds from teaching. So if you like what I do and you want to help me continue to do it, joining me on Patreon is a great way to do so. And the 3rd way is to purchase something from my shop. While I do still do in-person shows, it's mostly relegated to Louisiana. So the chances of us seeing each other at a show are not 0. You are very welcome to come to Louisiana and enjoy our food and enjoy our festivities and come see me at a show. That would be delightful, but I don't expect people to do that. And I figure most of you guys don't live in Louisiana, because analytics tells me most of you guys don't live in Louisiana. So rather than waiting to see me at a show, because I cannot make any guarantees, as an artist I cannot control what shows will take me and will not take me, you can find my art, you can find art prints, my comics, my prose and illustration books, plural, Lilliputian Living, and more over at natosoup.com/shop. I currently do not have an Etsy. I have not had an Etsy for years, but if you enjoy my work, you can find it at natosoup.com/shop, including these beautiful little acrylic flower sun catchers. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I hope this was helpful, useful, and informative, and I hope to see you guys again soon with another art supply review or tutorial. Bye, guys!